Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. If you got kids in school, if you have kids out of school, if you have kids that might go to school someday, you want to listen to this because Colorado's really led the way in charter schools, and it's actually a pretty rich history, and a lot of people don't know about it. The one lady who knows all about it is Pam Benigno, who runs our education center at Independence Institute. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, John.
Jim Griffin, who used to be the League of Charter Schools president. As a league, you had uniforms and superheroes, and it was really pretty cool.
It was mostly me. I actually had the cape and the whole thing.
That's a good thing. Yeah. All right, let's talk about this because choice inside government education really has grown in the last couple decades here in Colorado and actually around the country. Parents demand more choice in education. One of those choices is charter schools. Give me a quick definition. People sometimes hear the word charter school and they hear private school, not a government school. They hear all sorts of different things. What is a charter school?
Self-governing, autonomous public school, right? That operates under contract with an authorizing agency upstream, a school district or the state, who essentially gives them a contract, a license to operate a public school. But they're operating as a freestanding, self-governing public school.
All right, let me dumb that down for me. So what I'm hearing is, it's basically when a group of people, parents, decide they want to try something new, they have to be authorized through either the school district or through a state agency, and then they can start their own school. It's publicly funded. It's still a public school, but they get to run it in a different way. What am I missing in that?
You've got it exactly.
Got it exactly.
That's great.
All right. Why we're talking about it is because we now are celebrating 20 years of charter schools in Colorado. And I can't believe it's, because I remember this fight. I remember the fight in the late 80s and how it started to grow, and by 1993 we started having some different things. You just put together an interesting paper for the Independence Institute, and the older I get, the more I realize it's important to write down the history of how things happen. And you spent some time writing down the history of charter schools in Colorado. Tell me about it.
Well, actually went way beyond that, because there was a foundation that was laid way back in the 70s, especially in Jefferson County, with Open Living School opening in 1970 by a group of parents with the open concept. More hands-on, experiential, whole child. But then there was another group of parents in the mid-70s and about 74, Denison Fundamental School, and they wanted a fundamental school. They wanted back to the basics, rigorous academics. And so Jefferson County had...
So what I'm hearing, again, dumbing it down, there were some people who wanted the hippie school, and then there were some people who wanted the you're going to learn how to read, damn it, kids school. Is that...
I think you've got it.
All right.
That's good. But that's important, and those were actually movements going around the country. And so it started up in Jeffco first. It, came up in other places too in the state, but it started in Jeffco.
Jeffco Public Schools were funding these type of schools?
Yes. Yes.
So they really weren't called, there was no real charter law at that point about charter schools?
No. This is within the school district. The school district did this, but it was parents who initiated. And then that's what's important, is it was the parents that initiated these schools. And then in the 1980s, a lot of things were happening. People were really frustrated with the education system. You probably remember the Nation at Risk, that report that Secretary of Education Bell released.
If I knew how to read, I would have read it. Yes, but I heard about it.
Yes, it really sounded an alarm. And here in Colorado, there were parent groups starting up that were really concerned about the academics, about the values that weren't being taught in schools, just lots and lots of frustration. And about that time, Representative Jeannie Fotz started thinking about there ought to be a way that we can take public dollars and match them up with a child. And she started thinking about open enrollment, and that was happening in Minnesota. It started in Minnesota first. And
good. Dumbing it down. Remember, you're talking to me. Open enrollment, that's the idea that if you're not happy with the school your kid is going to, the public government school your kid's going to, you can go to a different school outside of your neighborhood if there's space. That's called open enrollment. Was that pretty common back then?
Well, no.
Really?
Although in Colorado it was certainly happening not by state law, but some districts were allowing that, and some even across district lines. But Jeannie tried several times. Finally, in 1990, it was stuck on in a conference committee on the School Finance Act. So that really helped get things going. And so Terry Considine, Senator Considine, and Bill Owens they were actually introducing some of the earliest bills back in 89, 90, 91, and they would always die in this one committee, Al Mickeljohn's Senate Education
I remember this.
Committee.
Okay, now I'm starting to catch on. This was State Representative Bill Owens back when he was just a pup.
He was a senator
he was
by
a
this
senator.
point, but he had just become a senator by this point.
All right, and Terry Considine, was he the representative at that point?
No, they were joined.
But they kept bringing forward these bills to somehow standardize the idea of school districts allowing parents this choice inside the district.
Well, actually, Jeannie Fotz did that, right. And what they didn't, and I didn't explain enough, was that they had ideas of, particularly Terry, a school renewal bill where there could be new schools, new public schools. We didn't have the term charter so much then. So they started carrying those bills, and they would consistently die. And then in 1992, Representative Jim Irwin teamed up with Bill Owens. Terry was out of the Senate to run for Senate, U.S. Senate.
That.
Yeah. And
by the way, he didn't win.
No, he didn't win. So they ran a bill, and it was actually the first charter-like bill that made it out of one house. But then it died again in Senator Mickeljohn's committee.
And this is the interesting part.
This is 1992.
I found about the history of charter schools, is that it really wasn't a Republican versus Democrat issue. Mickeljon was a Republican who kept killing these bills to give us more educational choice.
Well, that's true. And if you go back, of course, I don't want to spoil all the stories, because this paper is not a wonkish paper. It's a story. Jim?
It's a great read.
You said you and...
It's a great read.
It's a great read on a Friday night, no less, right? Is that what I think I read it on Friday night? That tells you something.
Yeah, but it really goes back and talks about Lamb pushing public school choice, and how it's stories about Romer. Barbara O'Brien got involved with this 1992 bill, and she had... Oh, she's throughout our story. Barbara was really key.
Right. So I mean, you have Republicans and Democrats in this story working on the issue of how do you get more choice inside charter schools. Let me bring you back to that time. So let's go back 25 years, 20 years. There was a lot of fear about this. The opponents of it really spread fear that this was going to lead to some bad things. Go back. What were they afraid of? What were the opponents of charter schools afraid of when this was being bandied about some 20 years ago?
I mean, I think in general, it's fear of an unknown. I mean, this is the greatest kind of volume of the fear and the concerns were coming from folks within the public school establishment. This was something other than the very basic, that very homogenous thing that they had always known in their lives, where kids go to schools based upon where you live. They're run by school districts. Every school looks something the same. We've standardized and regimented everything, and that's the public school system. And I think if you talk to a dozen of them about, if you dug down beneath that just generalized fear of the unknown, I think you'd come up with a dozen different stories about what they were fearful of. Often it would come down to kids getting left behind, certain populations, kids being left behind, whether they were poor, whether they were minority, whether they were rural, or someone always saw themselves as being potentially in the outs of some new system that had folks moving around to different schools. There was always fears of basically kind of winners and losers, even aside, just that some schools would be more popular than others, and some schools would be less popular, obviously, as parents have an ability to choose their own schools. There's fear that what could a group of parents, what could a group of teachers do in terms of running a public school that we, the school district, don't already know.
I think that,
right?
I think a lot of that was, damn it, we're the professionals.
Absolutely.
We're the government employees. We run it from the top to the bottom. We know what you're doing. What a bunch of parents are going to get together. They're going to come up with an idea. They're going to run a school. These are parents. They might be nice people. We're the professionals. We know how this works.
There was a school district, a prominent metropolitan Denver school district, that walked in, the group of parents that applied to open a charter in this district. They were denied, and that decision was appealed to the state board, as is the right under the charter law. You could go upstream for that. And this group of parents walked in and made their case. The school district stood up and essentially said that to our State Board of Education. We're the district, we're the PhDs, we've got this figured out. What could this motley group of parents know about running a school? And they got run out of that building that day. It was a 7-0 State Board decision I think one of the paper's headlines was, State Board slams Jeffco.
You can say Jeffco. It's okay. It was
a
Jeffco.
long time ago, right? Statute of limitations, anything. State Board slams Jeffco. The other newspaper at that time, back when we had two, said, Jeffco loses badly at State Board. I mean, it was an incredibly clear, strong statement then that no, parents actually, we get that and we believe in that.
A lot of it was, and you explained this to me years ago, when you shop around for your kid's doctor, you don't necessarily go to the doctor that's closest to you, but in that old one-size-fits-everybody system, you take the neighborhood school that you are assigned to, even if it fits or it doesn't fit.
Yeah, now the sponsors, I mentioned John Irwin and Bill Owens, and there was a terrible tragedy because just weeks before the session was going to begin, because they lost in '92, Jim Irwin died. And so Bill Owens had to find another sponsor, and Peggy Kearns, a Democrat in the House, had supported the 1992 bill. And so she became the sponsor of the 1993 bill. So it was a team between Bill Owens and Peggy Kearns.
A bipartisan attack.
Bipartisan. And in their bill, there was a provision for an appeal to the State Board of Education. And even Meiklejohn thought that that was a good idea. He was okay with that. The opposition didn't want it. The School Board Association, the school executives, the superintendents, and the teachers union, none of them wanted an appeal to the state board, and I know we need to explain what that is.
Yeah, but let's talk a little bit about that. So it's back in the early 1990s. The school union, the teachers union, hated this idea. Now they claim they liked the idea, but back then they really fought against this, and I understand why. Their job is to protect the jobs of their union members, and most charter schools are not unionized. They can have different hiring rules. They don't have a salary structure. They don't have a salary schedule, so they can do different things. That's the whole idea, and they really fought back in the early 90s against this.
Well, and they weren't happy on several accounts, and one was that the teachers weren't going to have to be licensed. And so, of course, they didn't like that. And they only wanted 20 schools statewide.
20 schools?
Yes. Originally they only wanted 20.
So,
yeah. But the state board appeal, that's really key.
The appeal, because it used to be you go to your school district and all the parents are there and say, we've got this great idea, we want to start this school, let us start the school, and the school board could go up yours, and they had no place to go.
And that's the way it probably would have been for charter schools unless this appeal, which changed a little bit. You want to explain the current, Jim, the appeal process?
Well, I'll tell you this, just by way of contrast. The state of Virginia has had a charter school law on the books since, I believe, 1997 or 1998. State with probably close to double Colorado's population. They have, I think, 3 charter schools. Three. Right. Oh, but what I forgot to note is that the local school board's decision is final and not appealable to anyone else. So anyone's welcome to come to them with an idea for a new school.
And they're free
to say no. But if they say
no,
no, it is a final decision, not appealable anywhere. There are 3 charter schools with somewhere in the ballpark of 400 kids in Virginia's
here in
charter
Colorado,
school system.
how many charter schools do we have?
So we're moving on into this coming school year because that's what's really relevant today. We say 200 schools, give or take a few, and it's 97,000 kids projected to be attending those schools this coming year. It's 13% of Colorado's kids.
All right, so now, given from there to here, 13% of the kids are now in these alternative, but still government-run schools. And the reason is because the school district, if they say no, they can appeal. And to whom do they appeal?
Our State Board of Education, our elected State Board of Education that sits in this appellate role and hears appeals from charter schools. And they've played that role probably 100 times since 1993. And they've gotten pretty good at it. They figured it out. They've probably gotten a couple wrong here and there over the years, but they've gotten a heck of a lot right because it's shaped the landscape that the charters and districts to this day work within, and it obviously seems to be a pretty workable, workable outcome.
Let me go back a little bit. So I love the politics of it because it had to get through the legislature and it had to be signed by the governor. Former Governor Lamb started talking about this, and he's always an outspoken guy. He's a free-thinking guy. It's one of the reasons we enjoy him. So, but then it also had to get past Governor Romer, and Governor Romer was a rank-and-file Democrat, but yet he signed on to this. How did that happen?
Well, I think that the Gates Family Foundation, which is not the Bill Gates Foundation, but the rubber company foundation here in Colorado, had a big influence on Governor Romer. They put on
They paid him off?
Yeah, they invited him to a conference. He was a speaker at a conference, and there's a whole wonderful story that you have to read the paper to get the story. But that had a big impact on Governor Romer, and he really wanted to understand the issues and the new reforms, because he was concerned about the public school system, and he worked very hard to get this bill to pass. He actually, Peggy Kearns invited him down on the House floor, and he spoke, which was not protocol, and upset one particular Republican very much.
Who's that?
And I'll tell you later.
Oh,
and,
I'll tell you later.
Yeah,
I hate that.
He brought all the freshmen into
Right.
his office and firmly told them that they needed to support this bill. He met with the Democratic caucus right after the second reading vote on the House floor. The next morning, it passed, and then the next morning, they all had on their desk a note from the School Board Association and another piece of paper from the teachers union telling them to vote no on the bill.
But really, it took some powerful personalities to get this system through, which is now serving 13% of the kids in Colorado. And it took Democratic legislators, it took Republican Bill Owens, who was a state legislator, and it took a Democratic governor who had to take on his own party, his union, and a lot in education. Those are wild factors to get there. Tell me a little bit of the story, because I need to know more. John Andrews at the time, who was the president of the Independence Institute, and Dave D'Evelyn were working on this, and I see Dave D'Evelyn's name in so many places, particularly in Jeffco. He's got a school and his high school named after him. Who's Dave D'Evelyn? What happened?
Well, David D'Evelyn became involved in the 1993 bill, the bill that passed. And Bill Owens, when he shared with me his own personal file, showed me letters that Dave had sent him and written out talking points for him and so forth. And so, in fact, before the bill was introduced, David D'Evelyn had raised money from the Gates Foundation, and the Children's Campaign joined together. They put on a wonderful 1992 conference that had a big impact on passing the bill. And so David was really giving a lot of the intellectual ammunition. That's what we say.
Aluminium.
The bullets.
The ammo.
The ammo. Thank you for the bill. In fact, the day it went to the House, he published a paper with good research on what we know about charter schools, or how they, he broke the myths and so forth. So
What's
he
that
was
about
really
Dave D'Evelyn, this guy who, an active citizen, worked with the Independence Institute, worked so hard to get this bill into law, died just before it was signed into law.
It did. Yeah,
he died in a small plane.
He did.
In a small
Yes.
plane crash, and he never got to see the fruits of his labor.
Right.
But now his name lives on in Jeffco and in Colorado history for doing
Yes, he was flying down with James Scammon to talk with a group of parents and of school officials in Durango that wanted to start a charter school. And they were both killed in a plane crash. So that story's in the paper. And I must say I have a co-author too, Kyle Marin. And there's been a couple of other people very helpful, Jackie Tobin and our own Ben DeGrow, of course.
Well, let's bring it to today. It can't all be sunshine and roses. I know that they're great charter schools and people are happy. How do you judge the success? And give me a failure or two. There must have been some charter schools that we tried something and you know what? It didn't work.
So let's start with those numbers, right? So we talked about 200 schools operating today and 97,000 kids in those schools. So as of this year, we can say that 31 schools have closed. So if 200 are opening, or 200 will be operating this fall, that's out of 231, let's say, that have opened since the dawn of time. So that's a solid 15% closure rate, right? And that's part of the deal.
When they fail, why do they fail?
So
and how do you know that they failed?
Yeah. The easiest, honestly, the easiest way to just tell if they've failed is when they literally go out of business because they don't have students, they don't have families, they run out of money. They can't
run out of
make it
customers,
work.
basically.
They're running out of customers, and whether it's the students stop coming or the money runs out, and that starts to, we talk about a death spiral that schools can get in where, mediocre academics can lead to mediocre enrollment, which means mediocre finances, which, these things kind of layer upon themselves and become part of what leads to a school's closing of its own accord. They can also be shut down by their authorizing, the authorizer, the entity upstream of them that gave them license to operate in the first place. They can be shut down.
So that's either the school board or the state board of education.
Right. They can
look at it and say, you guys are not doing a good enough job.
Correct.
You're out of business.
Charter schools are held accountable on the same performance expectations that all public schools in Colorado are. And
Meaning
so
which they have to take the same standardized tests.
Same tests, and then the same metrics are applied to their performance as are applied to any other schools. It's probably a bit easier to close a charter in some respects than it is to close other schools, or at least certainly culturally charters expect and kind of get that they could be closed if they're not performing. And those schools happen as well. Denver is
there any proof to show that charter schools have been more successful than traditional neighborhood schools in educating kids?
So taken as a whole, right? So we have some great data recently in Colorado where the Department of Education in its periodic review of charter schools and certainly charter school performance as part of that had a statement in there that was to the effect of, for the first time since they've been doing this report, they could note and report a substantially better performance record among charters than the state as a whole. So I thought that was notable that they felt they could say that for the first time, that there was a notable gap.
And that's an average.
That's an average.
Because
so
we have some high performing charter schools. Some of the
And
highest schools in the state, highest performing are charter schools.
40% of the state's top 50 schools, or at least maybe it's 40% of the kids in the state's top 50 highest performing schools are in charter schools.
All right, so overall, there's been failures because we're trying something
Correct.
new, and the failures fail. But as
Correct.
people who believe in the marketplace, that's a good thing. We're trying things, we're seeing if they work. But overall, it just seems to have a real option for parents, and over the last 20 years have helped kids out. And this year, they're going to be helping out almost 100,000 kids, 13% of the folks here. Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, we have the benefit of two things. We can look at it on the measures, the performance data, and the measures of standardized testing in our state system. We have the benefit of that just as the system does, and so you can look at how charters do vis-a-vis the school districts.
What about on parent side?
But on the parent side too, right?
I was going to ask.
We have the benefit. Charter schools don't have kids assigned to them, so when you're looking at schools, when you're looking at this 97,000 student number, there's a number on top of that are on waiting lists that are some just legendarily long, ridiculous waiting lists of 4, 5, 8, 10,000 kids on waiting lists of schools trying to get in. So there's a market side to that too.
If there's a charter school like Peak to Peak up in my neck of the woods that's so great that they have to have a lottery for people who are on the waiting list, why don't we just open up another charter school that does the same thing?
A lot of reasons, but part of it is, well, who's the we in that sentence, right? Peak to Peak is doing a great job with their 1,700 students. That's what they do. That's who they are, right? To replicate what they've done, right. Do you want? I mean, so to say we should do that, someone should go open that school. Well, that's the amount of work and energy and effort and sacrifice that went to get Peak to Peak to where they are today from where they started in 98, 97 or so is, if the average Joe looks at that and says that's a bit more of a mountain to climb than I'm up for, that's understandable. And to ask the school district to do it defeats, right, the whole purpose. Right?
And that's what's really sad is that why aren't that's what the public should be asking, why aren't public school districts just doing it? Why don't you just provide an education like this school?
So if Peak to Peak has this huge waiting list, you got to wonder, well, why doesn't the Boulder Valley School District, why don't you guys do more of that? And people won't want to go to the charter schools because they'll be happier in the neighborhood schools.
And that's some of the frustration parents were having in the 80s, is that there were schools like Denison, for instance, that was doing so well with 1,000 kids on the list. People were camping out overnight, literally, this is true, to get their kids on the list. How come the district wouldn't go ahead and replicate that school?
All right, let's bring it back. We've only got a couple minutes left, but I want to go back. I remember the unions hating the idea of charters, and now they say oh no, charters are good, we like charters. But I think the fear was that charters was a gateway drug to real educational choice, including vouchers or some sort of scholarship program where they could go to truly private schools. That hasn't really happened in any great way. Now I hear that unions say, well, we don't need vouchers, you got charter schools are doing so very, very well. Is a charter school a gateway drug? Has it brought forward this desire to have now private choice and not just public choice?
Maybe in some cases. The problem with the charter schools, they still have, the good ones still have long waiting lists. And there's not a charter school in everybody's neighborhood. So we still have a need for school vouchers or a tax credit program so that kids that aren't in a good school can actually go to a private school down the street. Maybe it's a Catholic school that's providing a great education in a near a lousy neighborhood school.
And the only way out. Were the fears of all this, when you go back 20 years ago and you're looking at this, did the fears ever really materialize? Yes, there were failures, but you knew there were going to be failures. Real fast, less than a minute.
Yeah, so I think to the extent that they feared that this would challenge the fundamental assumptions of the public school system, which is that this top-down hierarchical government structure, to the extent that would challenge that and maybe even expose that as something less than preordained by the Almighty, yeah, it has.
And that has worked. I tell you what, people want to hear this story, want to read this story. And it's a great bit of Colorado history. If you're a history junkie, this is a great paper. Where do they go?
Well, they can go to the Independence Institute's website, to the Education Policy Center pages, and go to our publications tab. And the paper is called On the Road of Innovation. Colorado's charter school law turns 20.
All right, that's independenceinstitute.org. Pam, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you so much. Listen for me late nights, actually afternoonish on KHOW. Tell a friend, we'll see you next week.